Hello, I'm here with a panel of writers who are ready and willing to share their knowledge and experiences with writing short stories. Say hello to Jesse, Kat, MK, Mina, and Stephanie. Why don't you introduce yourselves and tell us your connection with writing short stories? Jesse, would you like to start us out?
Sure. My name's Jesse. I'm a writer from Long Island, New York. And my connection to writing short stories is, well, I've always viewed it as a way to expand universes that I've developed in writing novels or comic books or whatever. So it's a way that I can take a particular niche of a situation or a character or a topic and dive into it a little deeper, expand the lore, for lack of a better term, and just try to have some fun. Um, Also, I grew up sometimes having time constraints on how long I could write in a given session or two, and it helped me tighten up my work a little bit.
I'm KJ Harwick, or Kat. My connection to short stories is I have started a writer in motion project a few years ago with editor Jenny Chappell, and we were curious about what it really looks like for each writer when they're writing a novel. You know, what is the process that we all go through, and the reason why we all feel so alone. So we wanted to use short stories sort of as a basis. And we run the project once a year now, and writers from all over the world come and they just get a prompt, write a short story, work with an editor, and have a really great time.
I'm Stephanie King. I am a writer from Philadelphia. I write fiction of all lengths. My shortest story is 100 words and my longest is 100,000. How my writing life usually works out for me is that when I'm in between writing novels, I'm tired and I focus on shorter stories. In this case, while we've been stuck home during the pandemic year, I've really been focusing on flash fiction because that has been the amount of time for writing I managed to sneak into the day.
I'm Mina, and I'm from Ann Arbor, Michigan. And the way I got into short stories was first seeing other authors publishing their short stories in places like Lightspeed, Clark's World, and noticing that the authors were also, like me, Asian American, which is not something I really saw when I was growing up. So, in a way, I kind of started writing short stories as a way to join in. And I actually kind of got started, I don't want to say a bit late, but I didn't really start writing and submitting until I was probably over 30. And I didn't realize there was a possibility that I could, have a day job and also write short stories. So here I am. I've been doing that now for probably about 6 to 7 years. And I would say starting this year, I'm trying to work on a novel in earnest.
Hi, I'm MK, and I basically am not an English speaker. So my journey started off as trying to write a novel in my own language and then realizing it's a miniature market. It's 4 million people in the entire country. So I realized I need to start writing in English in order to, basically write for larger audience, and a quick way into it and the easiest way for me as a non-native speaker was to start writing short stories. So that's how my journey with short stories started, and I wrote stories from 100 words to 10,000 words in short stories, and then I also wrote a couple of novels now on English, and I really love both reading and writing short stories. I think they're really fun. There's something that you can really enjoy in a shorter amount of time. And they do require maybe sometimes a little bit different skill set than the novels, but it's also a unique experience, and I think something that is valuable for every writer.
Well, a couple of you had already mentioned, that short stories can span from less than 100 words to thousands of words. So, MK, would you talk about the different types of short fiction and tell us which one is your favorite?
Uh, I think that's very difficult. It's kind of like asking, which one of your children is your favorite. Every basically format is a little bit different in a sense that you have to manage your expectations from different types of fiction, both when you're reading it and when you're writing it. So for, let's say, 100-word stories, which are extremely fun. This is something that I do, for instance, on my Instagram account. I publish 100-word stories just out of fun. And I also did some competitions. So NYC Midnight competition in 100-word story format. And this is something that you can do really quickly. For me, it feels very similar to poetry. So it's more about the right word choices and how words play off each other. And it's really cool for me also to practice my English skills in 100-word formats. But when you're going to, let's say, 10,000 word story, then the process of it is much more similar to writing a novel. It is a shorter length than a novel, but basically you're going through all the steps that you're going through as if you would be writing a novel. So this is one thing that maybe people are not expecting, that, oh, if I'm going to write a short story, it's going to be so much less work. But in my experience, it's the same amount of work, just for lesser number of words. At least it's been so that much work so far. And hopefully my first collection will come out this year, and it's even more work than some of my novels are, because then you also have sensitivity readers for every single short story. You have proofreaders for every single short story. It's for these longer formats of short stories, it's basically like a novel. And then there is also this flash fiction in between, where you're, let's say, at around 1,000, 2,000 words, and that's somewhere in between. So maybe there you're not conveying a full, message, a full story, but like a snippet or a short event, or you're trying to evoke a certain feeling, which is more similar to this very, very short, like 100-word format. So it's somewhere in between those two, not just by the length, but also by the process of writing it.
I think my favorite depends on what kind of mode I'm in right at that moment. For, like for this last year, between 600 and 700 words has really been the sweet spot for me, because it's just long enough for you to start to really build up some meaning and some intrigue and some investment, but also short enough that it's, it's like a heist, get in and get out. So, and before that, I would have said my favorite was like in between 20 and 21 pages. But I think what MK said, it really goes back to what your expectations are for the different lengths, and what your goal is. As a young writer, I feel like one of the things I needed to learn was not everything needs to be a novel. And so what I think one of the things about short stories is to pick the length that's going to do what you want it to do.
I guess I like the ones that are probably about, oh, I don't know, 2,500 to about 5,000 words. I think then there's enough length to maybe do a little world building and draw through a plot. It feels a little more, to me, it does feel like, it feels a bit more complete. I haven't had much experience with Flash, unfortunately. I have written a story that was 1,500 words, but at the same time, sometimes, I guess the way I feel toward shorter fiction is I can't really get into it because I personally, and I want to point out this is a me thing, that I am not probably good with summing things up or being able to construct a story with so few words. That takes skill, and unfortunately it's not one that I necessarily have quite yet. But yeah, I do like I like the 2,500 to 5,000. Those are the ones I'm aiming for. I'm just usually, that's when I write. Those are the ones that I do like to write, but I have problems with word count sometimes, huge problems. So I've been trying to work on that lately.
So I'm in the same boat as Mina. I'm really not great at balancing my word count, and I guess I'm the odd duck out when it comes to lengths because I look at it like this. I've heard people's definitions of how long different types of fiction are. Flash fiction is usually in the 100 range, maybe more. Whatever is whatever. For me, a short story might be 17,000 words because to me that's short, but that's kind of up to the author. I think there's no standard way to go about things, and I think as everyone else has said, yeah, there's no real thing that you have to be stuck in your whole life either. If you're going through a situation where you want to improve one skill, you might write a certain length for a while, and then hey, that's enough.
I think probably my favorite as far as writing is about 1,000 to 1,500 words. That's kind of the span that we do for Writer in Motion. We limit it to 1,000 words. And what I've found is it's amazing that when you have just a very limited amount, that writers can actually pack a lot of meaning into every single word. And then once the story's done, then they can take those skills that they learned back to their stories, and all of a sudden they're going, oh, yeah, I can cut about 30,000 words now because now I know how to do this. I know how to put greater meaning into every single thing that I say and every single line. But as far as reading, I actually like about 10,000 words. I'm reading a book right now called The Great Ship, which is basically just a bunch of short stories set in a universe that has a whole series, and it's fantastic. It's just about 10 to 15 stories in the whole thing. Each one has chapters, but these characters are just, it's like it takes every bit of the world that the author created outside of the actual story. So you get to see so much more, and it's just beautiful.
Yeah, in terms of length, I noticed on Twitter every now and then some authors will put up microfiction memes. And if anything, I mean, I realize I said that, yeah, flash fiction is usually not my cup of tea because I'm usually pretty bad at it. But I've found that sometimes getting into microfiction memes can be helpful in exercising that muscle in a sense. Like I like putting in requests with authors, but I also sometimes, if I feel that I can, if I feel especially confident, I'll put in something on Twitter saying, hey, give me a request and I'll do the thing. So I think if you have a problem with flash fiction and you feel like you can't really do it, those are really great ways to practice.
Yeah, I also do a lot of the prompts and writing per request, and I think this is a really, really fun exercise. I mean, you can get all kinds of, creative worlds that maybe you never thought about just by allowing someone else to, set the frame for you. And that's really fun with microfiction. That's something that, you wouldn't actually explore with writing a novel or a longer short story.
When it comes to short stories, how do you see that they improve someone's writing?
With a short story, one of the big things that you realize right away is you have to tell a beginning, a middle, and an end. And I'm really bad at this because a lot of times my short stories end up just falling into scenes, and they finish, but then it doesn't feel complete. It just feels like a piece of a larger world. So I think not only does it help you really focus on, okay, did I actually close the loop in this story? And now looking at my novel, did I actually close the loop again? Did everything the character wanted to do either get accomplished or completely fail by the end? Or did we miss the point and just kind of go off into infinity? So that's one way that, writers can really sort of hone that skill of getting those character arcs and those plot arcs just really solid. The other one is just line by line. With short stories, you have a limited amount of words to say a lot. World building becomes more difficult, getting emotion in there becomes more difficult, but the more you work at it, the more you learn that using a single word might have a lot more impact than using 7 words. So you start scaling back, and once you can really get the handle on doing that, it makes novel writing a lot easier, or at least the editing portion of it.
Well, I think I started off with saying that basically for me, it really helped me hone my skills in English language. So I think that's very useful for anyone who is not a native speaker to start with a shorter formats, because inevitably the first stories that non-native speakers are going to write are going to have a lot of both grammar mistakes and, you know, just this missing finesse that all of the native speakers will have. And a lot of your ideas maybe will not be, you know, that bad, and they could be used, but then you will just have so much work with editing all of that stuff out of the novel. And it's much easier, you know, to start off with short stories, and then if you like any of them, you can later on come back when your skills are better and edit them and create something useful out of them. And with novels, that's much harder process, and I basically skipped to novels later on when I was much more confident in my language skills.
I want, you know, agree with Kat that it's you know, thinking about how it needs to be a complete thing, and it strengthens all of those skills about plot and character and development. You know, the metaphor that you hear all the time for short stories is that they're like a cupcake instead of a, you know, a whole cake of a novel. But like, for example, you wouldn't take a slice of cake and just hand it to somebody, right? That's why a cupcake exists. And so you've got to, you know, you've got to like think about what the wrapper is and how you're holding it together. And it's, you know, how you have to structure it so that it, you know, the frosting doesn't fall over or slide off. And, you know, so I think that, you know, a short story is just a more perfected form that you are thinking about and practicing all of these moves that make you a better writer overall in anything.
So I'm going to tell a story, just a very short little anecdote about someone I matched with on Tinder. It turns out we were both writers. And I asked him, all right, what do you write? And he said, novels. I don't believe in short stories. And I was just like, well,
Fighting word.
yeah, exactly. Well, I write short stories. I do not, you know, and he, okay, obviously this did not lead into a date, but it was interesting seeing his opinions and saying, well, my imagination is so expansive. It just, I don't see the point of reading stories that are only a few pages long because my imagination is so expansive and I just want to write epics. And it's really not as easy as he was making it out to be. It's just as KJ was saying, you have to be able to build that complete story within a few pages and, you know, lead the reader in, maybe just also gently lead them out around the end. And it takes a really good skill set. It takes a strong skill set that may not be the same as writing novels. So I think both forms are good, but I also just think that writing short stories for me has been a way to strengthen my writing in ways that maybe writing a novel may never ever do, because I have to think about things like pacing or emotional journeys a little more because I only have that much limited word count.
Steph, I love your cupcake metaphor. I happen to have a muffin. It's not quite the same thing, but if we play pretend real quick, I'm going to draw back on what Kat said about a beginning, which would be the frosting, the middle, which would be like the hard, crusty stuff at the top. That's not quite everyone's favorite. And then you've got the more scrumptious, gooey ending, the end of your story. Don't ask me why I have a muffin spare. I just happen to. And so, yeah, I really don't have much to add other than it improves your writing skills because you do have to do the same beginning, middle, end, the rising action, the falling action, whatever you want to call it, and you have to do that with a much more limited amount of space in as little as you can get it. Sometimes even more than you can get it, and you have to cut stuff apart. So it makes you more precise with your words. It forces you to use better diction. It's very enjoyable. It's just it's difficult for some people, and I can understand why.
Well, Kat had touched on this earlier about, you know, you have a limited word count with short stories. And I imagine that it makes some writers feel like it's restrictive. So how is it possible to still focus on more showing than telling?
I actually wanted to share one example of a microfiction that I wrote. It's a 100-word story that I wrote for the NYC Midnight contest, and it got a honorable mention. So it's called A Sound in Space. So I wanted to show you, not tell you how to do it. Careful not to let any sound. I sealed an envelope. Don't let it crinkle. 2 words scribbled on the paper inside. Help me. I put the letter into the capsule. Don't let the lid pop. And shot it out into the vast emptiness. A voiceless prayer stuck on my lips for someone, anyone, to find me in this haunted ripple of space-time, but don't whisper. My pen dropped. Clink. The vortex of stars spun. Clink. The darkness crept in through the scenes. Clink. I swear I saw eyes. Clink. My throat burned as the slimy beast slid down. Help me. So I hope that was showing, not telling.
Yes.
It was very, very good. Thank you.
So I think it's just the thing where you can't go off on a tangent in 100 words or 1,000 words, right? You have to be focused on your goal. And so it's almost the equivalent of, if you slip into telling, it'd be like when you're talking to a friend and they're like, yeah, get to the point, right? So there's that kind of momentum in a short story that you can't slide back into the telling because you need to be showing all of the time.
I think sometimes when it comes to balancing word count, I can get bogged down a bit in details. Or sometimes I will go into characters' thought processes and it'll just be a bunch of narration and it gets boring. So it tends to make me go, so I think I've had problems with conveying emotion. And I think it's because I can tend to get a little bit too much into the character's head and not really go into how they're feeling about it. So I think there's a story I'm working on now where I've gotten some personal rejections that I've had critiques like, we want to see more of, how this character is feeling. And it's taken me some time to kind of think about like, okay, how would I do that instead of just writing something like, oh, well, I felt sad or I felt angry. And then you have to really go into things like, how do you feel when you're about to cry? Or what would you do if you were angry, and so on and so forth. That might seem a bit basic, but that's the way I try. So.
Well, I think Mina said, asked a great question, is how would you do it? And I think MK had the great answer for it, which was just to do it, to show us. Beautiful story. Clever. I think I caught something at the end that was interesting. But wow, that's it's just such an awesome way to really lay home. Like, all right, so this is how you do a short microfiction. Showing the reader, on the other hand, how different stuff works is a little different for the stuff I write, because I do tend to write things that expand upon a universe. It's a little easier for me to slip into telling just because, hey, if you're here, you're interested. And if you're interested, you want to know more. And so telling you a little bit that you won't find anywhere else is like telling a secret that only certain readers really understand. And I know that's not really showing. I know that's not really the best way to do things, but I don't know. I've always been the sort of reader that I like having things told to me to some extent, just because I like to know where the baseline is so I can dig deeper into it at my own pace.
When you're trying to show instead of tell, in short stories, it can be a little bit tricky, just like novels. It's not all about showing and it's not all about telling. There's a real balance that has to happen to give readers a sense of feeling the world and exploring it, but also bridging that information that's necessary right away. So it always makes me think about the first chapter of any story. You know, so many people say the first chapter makes or breaks a story. Either you've got your reader or they're just like, see ya, bye. So when you think about that, looking at your first chapter, let's say it's 3,000 words. So how would you make that 1,000 words and tell a full story? And the story's done just for that one piece. And that's when you started looking through it, and you can go, okay, this is for the rest of the book, so we're going to cut that. Or this piece right here is, I'm saying the same thing 3 times to engage the reader, but I don't need to do that in such a short story. So I'm going to simplify these into, she ran across the field. You know, so there's a lot of different ways to show and tell in a limited amount of space and really, really bring the focus in tight. Don't get bogged down in details. Don't get bogged down in all of the big things going on. They're there, but the readers only need to see what's absolutely necessary to understand what's going to happen to this character.
So I was about to say, yeah, KJ brought up some good points, about word use, and how I was thinking about the phrase she ran across the field, and I immediately thought, how would I maybe make that a little bit more descriptive in the name of showing? And I thought the word bolted. Because one of the critiques I've had from betas when I'm polishing short stories before submission is I would choose another verb. And I've thought that's really helped out and making my writing less telling and more showing, just picking different verbs and just to show how people are moving or acting or feeling.
I like that, because bolted really shows an emotional element of maybe she's afraid, or maybe she's like behind time, instead of just running, which is so vast and generic. So that's brilliant.
I just wanted to add to this that maybe also using words which convey like sounds, which would really happen, like swishing and whooshing or stuff like that. That's also adding a little element of showing.
Well, let's stick with this limited word count concern for a moment. How is it possible to develop a character and give them a strong voice?
Well, I'm working on a story right now, and I don't know if this necessarily answers the question, but this is a character who I spent maybe some time thinking about her and how rebellious she is. She ran away at a young age. She ran away from home at a young age, and now she's being summoned back. And I guess when strong voice, that was the question, right? Strong voice?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, dialogue, really action. Wondering sometimes with me, just because this character is so different from me, I wasn't particularly rebellious. But of course, she wasn't thinking, what is this action? Like, how does this action feel as an outsider? Like, if this character is doing something, I'm going like, oh my God, what are you doing? That tends to help. I guess like the emotional impact that the audience might have if the character is, saying something that might get her in trouble or doing something that might get her in trouble.
One solution to this could be that tropes are your friend. It's very rare that we're going to come up with a brand new thought or brand new idea. It's much more likely that a reader's going to come in and go, all right, we've seen the young pickpocket in a festival before. How are we going to differentiate this particular pickpocket from any given other one? And that's where the voice really comes in. Like, all right, we kind of know, we can take a guess at some of the things that this character's had in their past. What are they doing with it? What is the author showing the reader that is being done with the difference in the voice? That's just one solution, but it's one I figured I'd share.
When you look at voice as what does the character do? How do they move through their world? How do they react to certain things? What choice of words would they use, on any given day? Like I have a character who was just trying to return an item to one of the planets, and so the inhabitants can take off. he drinks whiskey, he swears all the time, his ship is up in the air, he's getting chased, and within 1,000 words, it was possible to build this entire personality. So by the end, when he's standing there with like no clothes on going, what the hell, it kind of makes sense by the end because you've already been on this 1,000-word journey. But looking at that, developing that character means, okay, are they drinking whiskey, or is this somebody, that would probably drink tea with Judi Dench? So then you start looking at the words that you associate with that. Using those words, that's where these word choices come in really, really strong again. Find those words that your character is going to use. Find those little elements that are going to make your character go, I am just enough of unique that you have to notice me.
I just remembered listening to Jessie that there was a great critique that a friend had for a story of mine. And it was something about bay leaves. You put them in the soup, but when you taste them, you don't necessarily know they're there. And they said, you can do the same with this character. There's a bunch of stuff about her that you obviously want to put in the story, but you don't really have the time to, but you can let that, maybe what you know about that, inform her actions, what she does. Because I think I only had about maybe 5,000 words, and I had built this world about this character, but I couldn't put all of it in, but I tried to put some of it in. Just like you don't see the actual bay leaf, but you see some aspect of it. Mm-hmm. Perhaps that you can maybe make inferences.
I'm not going to share do's, maybe don'ts. And one don't is don't give your character a generic voice. So anything that makes this character unique, like like a day job that this character is doing, the history, anything that makes this character unique, include these elements, like KJ said, include it in the word choices, include it in this very short span, in every single action that this character does, every single word that this character chooses, and then you will basically create a strong voice just by implementing all of this into the character and into the words.
I think you do it by all of the little tidbits that you drop about the character throughout the story, and the way their dialogue flows, and the way that they're described. Look at us, we're 5 different people in 5 different places, but each of us talks a specific way. Each of our backgrounds might be leading people to assume certain things about us, and so, like, even in this short amount of time, right, we have established these distinct personalities. Mm-hmm. And that's the same way that you build voice in a story.
Well, Stephanie, how is it possible to balance the theme, the character, and the plot with that limited word count?
Well, so in the same way, the shorter the piece, the more every individual component has to work. So you can't, like, going back to the short show don't tell conversation, you can't like tell the whole history of anything. So you've got to just do it with what you're writing at the moment. The example that I really love to give is in the original Star Wars, or New Hope, depending on how old you are. There's that one line where Luke says, "Oh, hey, you fought with my father in the Clone Wars," and they just keep going, right? They don't, and then they go and make a whole bunch of prequels. But at that time in that movie, it was only one line, and it gave you so much information. It gave you, the characters. There's Luke, there's Obi-Wan, there's the father. It gives you a backstory. So like he knows that this guy and his dad go way back, and it gives you some theme, like, there's this family mythology, and that, Luke is kind of in awe of this guy. So like short stories need you to be doing that with all of the things that you decide to include. You can't just get up in the morning and make your morning coffee. You have to, you make your morning coffee angrily and banging things because you're still mad about the fight you had with your wife last night. or you are pouring the coffee and humming to yourself because you've got that big interview today and you're sure you're going to ace it, or your coffee doesn't taste like your grandma used to make in her battered tin can coffee pot that she saved from the Depression. You have to be doing all of those things at once.
You know, I just kind of write the story. Like I think about it in my head and I kind of have to, then I just write it out. And then I let other people, you know, like beta readers decide, okay, is this balanced? So I don't think, how to say, it's not something I think about on a technical matter necessarily when I'm doing concepts and so on and so forth. Okay. If that makes any sense. So it maybe maybe I'll get inspired by a show and then I take one concept and then I maybe take a narrator or a main character and I go, okay, how would this work, and build it from there, or have character interactions that I would like and then build it from there. And then somewhere within writing the story, then that balance comes out.
Yeah, I love what Steph said about the panel developing our personalities. I think I'm going to build off of that metaphor, and I'm going to say that throughout the course of this panel, you've gotten to know a little bit about who we are and what we think about things, and that's great. And you're also getting information, hopefully, that's useful along the theme of how to write short stories, stuff that you can take and use in your own craft. And I think when it comes to a good short story, you've got to leave something with the reader that they wouldn't necessarily get from a full-length novel, because there's so much breadth there that, like, there's not going to be one thing you draw away from a novel. But if a short story can hit on one theme really hard and knock it out of the park, boom, you've got yourself a story that people are going to want to read and they're going to learn something from.
I also absolutely love what Stephanie said. I think she just really nailed it right there. And taking that further, you know, with all of our personalities. So I'm going to use myself as a guinea pig here. So the theme I came with today was Writer in Motion, which is a short story project, you know, and let's see, what was the other one? Character. Well, obviously you guys have kind of been learning my character a little bit throughout this discussion, or if you've seen any of my past panels. And let's see, the last one was plot. Well, my plot is, you guys saw my picture go up for a minute because my son decided to come downstairs and just play his pad as loud as it could be and hide under a blanket and then start screaming that he refused to go back upstairs. So, you know, all of those things have happened within 30 minutes. And so with short stories, you can really do the same thing. It's just those little tiny fragments that really give a strong impact and build that whole picture.
So, stories often inspire people to begin writing. What are some of your favorite stories?
So, Isaac Asimov, before I begin with him, he's got some problems as a person, right? But his short stories, The Last Question and The Last Answer, really dig at the nature of divinity, and they leave a reader feeling like, oh, hey, I got something out of this. I got some kind of existential dread out of this, maybe, but, you know, that's something, right? Another story that I liked is Rebirth by, and I hope I'm reading this note right because I can't write for my life, Judith Tarr. It's part of the Sun and Glory short story anthology by set in Mercedes Lackey's Valdemar world. And it gives you a look at something you don't normally see in Lackey's novels. And even though I personally felt like some of the stuff kind of caught me off guard, and I was like, oh, I didn't expect they would do things that way in this world. I also went and I said to myself, well, okay, now I know this is interesting, and you get to see the Fountain of Rebirth, or I can't think of what it's called off the top of my head, but you get the idea. You get to see it, you get to experience a character interacting with it. And to me, that really brings me home, and it makes me start thinking like, okay, what can I do to expand my universe now?
Well, I touched on this earlier, but one of my favorites I'm reading right now is The Great Ship by Richard Reed. And it's literally just short stories based in his universe. And it's around this ship that's about the size of Jupiter. And it was just a machine that was just flying through the universe, and humans found it. It was completely derelict. And then they started kind of inviting all these other species in. And then in the center of it is a planet. which is really, really cool. But all the stories really kind of dig into these nuances over the millennia of just little bit things. And it's so wonderful to read, especially if you love science fiction and you love really thick, deep world building. My other favorites are all the writer in motion stories. You know, every year we do this project, we get tons of writers that just they take one prompt and all of them go in just different directions. We get science fiction stories, we get, you know, stories about grief, stories about children, stories about trying to dig into family lore. And it's amazing to see what everybody can do just on a single picture and what they see and what they don't see.
One of my favorite short stories is Bloodchild by Octavia Butler. Here, I think maybe many people didn't hear about Octavia Butler before. Now, since the Perseverance landing site on Mars is named after her, maybe now they heard about her. But basically, Bloodchild is a story that won both Hugo and Nebula Awards. And it's a story in which basically humanity is kept alive by an alien species, which likes to use men as breeding organisms for their own young. So they're keeping women to give birth to human children, but then a lot of the men are picked to be parents to the alien children. And it's a very tough process of giving birth, and it's kind of the looking at it the other way around. Octavia Butler likes to play with many things like this. And I just wanted to share just a short snippet of this story. So just the beginning. My last night of childhood began with my visit home, and Tgasoi's sister had given us 2 sterile eggs. Tgatoi had one to my mother, 1 brother and sisters. She insisted that I eat the other one alone. It didn't matter. There was still enough to leave everyone feeling good, almost everyone. My mother wouldn't take any. She sat watching everyone drifting and dreaming without her. Most of the time, she watched me. And this is something, I really love Octavia Butler's work. And she has just this unique way of dragging you into the story with just this beginning. There is this intrigue, there is this question mark, there is this foreign word, some sort of alien. Then eggs, what do eggs mean? And why the last day of childhood? What does it mean? And this is why I wanted to share the beginning of this story. So if you want to read it fully, go ahead and get the book and read it.
Honestly, my favorite short story is always whatever I read in the last week. One of the things about, which is not to say that my attention span is super short, but one of the things that I love about the current online publishing world is that there are so many new things coming up all of the time, and so it's so wonderful to see like lots of little things every week. I think it's just it's so great that there are stories that you can read on your phone, and that there are longer collections that you can download and read in front of your fireplace. And so I'm really just loving like whoever's issue was the last one to come out.
Yeah, like Stephanie, I just tend to read a lot of short stories, and then I'll tweet the links and go, I really love this one, even if I can't really say anything profound about it. Sometimes there's just sometimes stories are just written so well that you're just like, wow. And there's not really anything profound that you can do to tell people like about it, except just read it right away. I can't think of titles right off the top of my head, but I will say that there is a story in Lightspeed by J.V. Anderson called Water Birds that I absolutely loved. I think that was written around 2019. It is about an android who used to be, I guess, a companion. And I think she's currently looking after an old woman, and it's not her, I don't think it's so much about a relationship with the old woman as it is trying to actualize herself as an android that, has been out of date for some time, and really just figuring out how she wants her relationships to go and even how she wants to present herself to the world. And, even though it's supposed to be science fiction, I just love the deeply human plot and the deeply human connections that were made in that short time. So that was one that's really stayed with me over the years. And I will admit some bias been published in this place before, but there have been some really great stories in Traveler's Lounge. Trying to, I do believe there was one about a, there was a story by an Asian author, I think it was a Singaporean author, that had that was looking for a jade knife, and it was a cooking contest. I believe it was all fantasy based, but it was a magical cooking contest. And even though there was really only one maybe speculative element in there, it was just such a moving story because of the connections they made and the motivations behind the characters and the relationships that were created. So I'll have to find the story, because I think there was another story. And I want to say it was in Lightspeed. It's called Umami, and either after this panel or something, I'm gonna have to like put up the the name and the authors. But that was a really fabulous one too.
All right. Well, so these stories, they inspire more stories, right? So after someone has finished a short story draft, what editing process do they need to go through? And I know Kat has mentioned Writer in Motion. I've participated in that, and that was great. And that actually helps teach writers, what processes they need to go through as well, and as well as showing other writers what processes we do go through. So, what is that, Kat?
Well, one of the things that you want to start with is, where is the story going to go? If it's just for Writer in Motion or if it's for your blog, you still want to have critique partners look at it. Send it to some friends. Say, does this make sense? Are the characters believable? Did you connect? Is the world building confusing? Or were you able to visualize it? For Writer in Motion, we not only do CP rounds or critique partners, but we also have our editors, and they come in and they'll take about 10 stories each and they'll do a full line edit. And it's wonderful. I've worked for Carly 3 times in a year. 3 times in a row. She's fantastic. She's also my book editor. I also work with Jenny Chappelle. Just any of the editors we bring in, they love the stories. They love working with writers. And then if you want to submit it somewhere, like a publication or a magazine, or even put them together as far as a compilation or an anthology, you're definitely going to need an editor. But you'll need, a little bit more on the development side or a manuscript critique. And then you'll want to have people to help you proofread it and really get it ready so that once it's sold or passed off, then it's an easy process to get it finished up.
So for my short stories, I basically go through all the editing steps. So starting from content editing, line editing, proofreading, all the steps that I would go through with a novel. Then there is also sensitivity reading, which is so very necessary even for short stories. This is not something that is saved for the novels. And then also, of course, editing steps after beta reading and yeah. So any sort of editing step that you can imagine, short stories should also go through them. I think it's maybe a little bit different with microfiction, because they're maybe the only thing that you need for a microfiction, which is, let's say, 100 words long, is proofreading. But for anything longer, already for 500 or 1000 word stories, you should consider all the stages of editing.
So I'm kind of the opposite of most writers in the sense that I always need to edit up instead of edit down. So for me, editing is always going and finding all of the spots where there are holes and filling that in and expanding it. So, you know, a 300 word draft becomes 600, a 10,000 word draft becomes 12,000. So that's kind of, you know, that's, I know a lot of people, you know, they go through and they have to cut out all of the, whatever, all of the passive verbs or all of the actuallys and varies and that kind of thing, and yeah, I find it's the opposite problem. I just sort of like assume that people can visualize in their head what I was talking about, and then I'm like, oh no, Stephanie, you have to actually describe that thing.
So I used to do this thing where I would just edit as I go along, edit while drafting. That worked in earlier years before I started out. And then when I started just writing stories for submission, that really didn't work because I would get caught up in my perfectionism and the draft would never get written. And I'm still trying to internalize the idea, the concept that a perfect draft is a finished draft, at least for first drafts. So what I usually do is I write the thing out and then I will send it off to betas and go, and we usually workshop it from there. I used to have this thing with a friend who is also a writer where I would just send her drafts. She would send me revisions of bleeding ink and I would expect no less from her. And then I would just keep doing it until she finally went, all right, yeah, this is about as good as it's going to get. And then I would send it off to submission. These days, I think what I do is I will kind of just maybe send it off to one person and then they will see what they have to say and then maybe give it only a few passes. Like with previous drafts, I probably give it like maybe 7 to 8 passes, which is a lot. And it tends to slow down when you're submitting things. So maybe I would do 3 passes and then I'll send it off and then see what the editors at Venue say. Like with this recent work in progress, I've started getting personal rejections, and that's kind of giving me the signal to say, okay, I need to sit down and I need to workshop this. So I just did that with a few other people, and then it ended up that I had to rewrite some sections entirely from whole cloth. So I don't know if that's actually an answer, but that's how my process works.
You all answered it so perfectly. It's hard for me to really come up and follow that. Yeah, no. The editing process is very similar to if you were doing a novel or anything else. You know, Mina said the perfect draft is the finished draft, which is absolutely correct. You've got to get the words down on paper before you can start making your first draft into your second. Kat, you mentioned critique partners. I think that's an absolutely great first step. Beta readers, I know somebody mentioned that, all the way up to getting a developmental editor. That's all really important stuff. It helps make your work the best that you can make it. And when you put it out there, it's going to hopefully inspire more people.
After all of that editing and beta reading and all of that good stuff, what can a writer do with those finished short stories? Where can they look to submit for publication?
So I really love Submission Grinder. It's the best when looking at venues to submit your stories. You can kind of tailor it to what venues you're looking for, whether you want to do pro paying venues or semi-pro or token. You can filter by word count, you can filter by genre. It's my go-to when I'm picking venues. I usually tend to go by pro paying venues first for the most part. If there is a submission call, if there's a submission call, then I will just try to send it to that venue, whether or not it is semi-pro or pro. There are some semi-pro venues that are quite good that are on my bucket list that I haven't yet cracked. So, but usually I start from the pro and then I go down from there. But don't ignore the semi-pro venues just because they're paying semi-pro. I've seen some really excellent stuff from semi-pro paying venues. So that's what I do. I probably, and it also depends on how widely you want your stuff read too. Yeah, the pro-paying venues can have more people viewing it, but I think the semi-pros have also started getting more recognition lately. And also make sure you're reading the issues of those venues to see if your story would fit in, or to see if this is a place that you would really want to submit.
I'm planning to self-publish my short story collection, so I think that's also always an option. But however, there are many options in elections and competitions and online magazines. I really love reading, let's say, Strange Horizons, and I've also submitted one or two of my stories there. As someone already mentioned before, Clark's World. Then there are also competitions, some of them I mentioned before, like NYC Midnight Fiction contest, and there is like short fiction contest, flash fiction contest, microfiction contest, so plenty of places to send your story. And also other competitions where even at the end of the competition you would get your story published in an anthology. Plenty of options for the writers.
I definitely want a second Submission Grinder. It's one of my favorite places to look for things by, lengths and rates. The two things that have been most fruitful for me, besides, using something like Submission Grinder or Duotrope, where you sift through listings, is first of all to keep a running list of the places that you read a story that you enjoyed. And maybe their submissions aren't open right at that moment, but when you do have a story that's done and you're thinking of where to send it, whether you're saving it in your Duotrope account or it's a scratch pad, go back to that list when you've got your story and say, okay, now who do I think might like this? The other thing is that I would recommend following the magazines or editors of the places that you like on Twitter, because there will be lots of calls for submissions or pop-up submission windows, or they'll mention something is coming far in advance, and then when it does happen you can jump on it.
So my situation is a little bit different. I'm in the self-publishing racket, and it's an interesting experience. I like the creative control over what you're working on. And so for me, it's more a matter of, do I feel that this thing is ready to go out? And when I do, I have to figure out how I'm going to promote it, how I'm going to get it into people's eyes, and where I'm going to publish it, all of those things. It's pretty tricky, but if you're looking for something a little different, if you're looking for the more traditional route, something I don't think I've heard anyone mention yet is anthologies. Sometimes there are just anthologies that are out there that are regular repeating, or sometimes, especially a lot of new publishing companies, it seems, will go with an anthology or two to start off, and those are great places to start getting into the field.
I write science fiction and fantasy, so our field is a little bit limited on where you can submit. There are certain magazines that will never take it. There's sci-fi places that won't take fantasy. But everybody's pretty much said it. Look at magazines, look at anthologies, especially around conventions. I know Jordan Con every year does an anthology. Some writers they invite, some writers actually request and they get in. If you're self-published, there's short stories you can use as a reader magnet. It's what I'm using right now. I've got 3 short stories on my site. My book comes out in the fall, and you can use it to share with people for free and say, hey, this is the kind of stuff that I like to write. This is the weird stuff. If you like this voice, you might really like this book. Or you can do what Richard Reed did, and you just pile up short stories over the years, and then you release them all in your own anthology. Maybe you've got a really vast universe that has a lot of different moving parts, and being able to share little bits of stories through each of those parts with readers, you might get a lot of them say, oh, I really like number 6. Can you please make that a full novel? And if you hear it enough, then you can definitely look back on that and go, okay, readers are interested. They really liked this one. Let's see what I can do.
So yeah, I just wanted to also put in some advice while submitting. And I realize some of this might be obvious on its face, but really pay attention to the submission guidelines and pay attention to what the magazines say they will not take. For example, I have a story about cannibalism. So when I was looking at venues where to submit, there was one venue that said, we will not take stories about cannibalism. So I went, okay, I will not submit there. But I have heard some editors complaining on Twitter going, you know, here is another story that did not go past the did not go with the guidelines. Here are people submitting that we expressly asked not to submit. This is irritating. So please don't do that. You're basically wasting not only the editor's time, you're wasting your time because they're going to say no. And that time could be used to go to a venue that could accept your story. Second of all, for marginalized writers, do not self-reject. This was probably this was some of the best advice I got from R.B. Lemberg, who accepted my first story for their anthology, An Alphabet of Embers, because I remember talking to them and saying, I don't know, I don't think I'm gonna do this. I'm probably gonna get rejected anyway. And they sent me a really kind email saying, please don't self-reject. Send your piece. I may reject it, but you know, I'll read it. And I don't know, then I finally just went, all right, I'll see what I can do. And the rest is history. So yeah, don't self-reject.
I definitely want to second the, don't self-reject, for sure. Don't you be the one to tell you no. The other thing, I do read submissions for a literary magazine and people kind of agonize over the cover letter. And I just want to throw in there that it does not need to be like some crazy witty thing. It really just needs to be like a polite, hello, here is my story, here is my bio, thank you for reading, bye. So don't get, don't let the submission process be the thing that you get hung up on. And the other is that if you get personalized rejections, if an editor tells you to send them another story, for God's sake, send them another story. They really mean it. They do not have to say that at all. And so if they say it, there's sometimes there's like the little lukewarm one that's like, yeah, you could send us stuff if you want. But if they call you by name and say, send another story, they do really mean it. I know I always mean it when I say it.
I just want to add in that listening to Steph talk about that. So yeah, I remember getting one of my first personalized rejections, well, or maybe form, I don't know, but it said, we want to see more of your stuff. Please send more. And I was thinking, because this was my first month submitting, going like, oh, they're just being polite. Yeah, they're just being nice. They don't want to discourage me. And a writer friend went, no, they mean it. They mean it. And if they didn't mean it, that would be wasting your time and theirs. So send your stuff. And then I was like, okay. But, growing up, I was always, if I got compliments, I'd be told by grown-ups, yeah, they're just being polite to you. So for me, I was just like, yeah, maybe they're just being nice. And yeah, so I have had to disavow myself of that notion. If they mean it, if they say send more of your stuff, they mean it. Do it.
Well, you all have been great, and I thank you for sharing your experiences with the Right Hive community. And before we go, we'd like for you to be able to share any of your published works with the viewers. Anything you're working on, you want to talk about your work in progress, whatever you want. Stephanie, do you want to go first?
Sure. So I have made it my goal for 2021 to have one story come out every month. And so I've been hitting it so far. I had a story just come out in No Contact magazine. I have ones that should be out in Moon Park Review and Street Cake magazine soon.
So I just had a story come out in the anthology Remapping Wonderland from Alternating Current. It is an anthology of fairy tales retold by people of color. And I have a Little Mermaid retelling in there called The Things That Keep Us, which coincidentally is the story that had the critique with the bay leaves. So if you'd like to pick up a copy, Alternating Currents it's been on sale, I think, since January. I also have a story, a cannibalism story, which was published last year. That's called Hunt, and it is in Translunar Traveler's Lounge. I am also published in the anthology Robot Dinosaurs, An Alphabet of Embers, as I mentioned earlier, and in Kaleidotrope magazine.
Most of my work can be found at my website, jpullmanwriting.com. This short story collection here, the Cassandra Cycle and Short Tales of Amor, they are about basically the kingdom and world I created. And it's old, but it's available on Lulu. And I have an Amazon page. You can find recent short stories of mine are Jason's Vacation to Arason's Wood and Trust. Both also short tales of Amor, again set in this fantasy, Final Fantasy type situation. And I encourage you to check it out. And I want to just say thank you again for having me.
You can find me at authorkjheroic.com. I've got 3 short stories for free up there. I'll be writing another one this summer during Writer in Motion, which starts July 9th. So if any writers out there want to hone their short story skills, definitely come join us. It's not a contest. It's open to everybody. I have a book coming out this fall, so I'm really excited for that. And I think that's about it.
You can find me on Instagram at m.k.martins. You can find me on Twitter on m-k-martins. Webpage is under construction, so soon hopefully also there. And yeah, I'm making, I have a short story collection in the editing stage, so hopefully by the end of this year that should be pretty much wrapped up and ready to publish. Yeah, so.
Well, I thank you all for sharing, and I think that's a wrap. So,
Hooray!